How about now?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. You
So
see a blank screen. I'm going to mute myself. Okay.
you see just a white screen with words at the top.
Yes.
Okay. Mysteries of the season, right? So I'm approaching today with a sense of humor. I had trouble trying to decide what my focus was going to be, my theme. For a while, I was working with what's green because there's so many things that are green, even though it's wintertime. And I thought by drawing people's attention to it and how they get greener in the spring would be fun. So I wanted to have a sense of humor about it all. So, and I definitely think that mallards are funny. But look at that green head. So we've got some what's green. And then I recently wrote a little piece for the Black Island Times about micro seasons. And in Japan, they don't have 4 seasons a year. They have 72. And they're broken up into 5-day periods where you really have to focus on the subtle, very subtle and small changes in each 5-day period. So I have structured this whole thing on the micro seasons of March. So you'll see that. And some of the micro seasons are very subtly changed and they're mysterious. Look at that. We've got moss and it's incredibly green, and that's a winter photo. And then, of course, green can mean many things. It can mean a renewable EV electric vehicle. So gonna have some fun today. And with that, here we go. The first micro season of March 1st to the 5th is red wings sing. And I'm sure if you're around the island or just about anywhere in the Northeast, you probably started to hear the trilling red-winged blackbirds. The males are the ones that call, and they have that trill that's very distinctive. And they showed up here around February 9th. And now they're really starting to sing in earnest. Thing about red wings is it's only the males that sing. And in fact, these are 2 males. On the left is a very adult, multi-year red-winged blackbird male. And the one on the right is a male in its first year plumage. But you can see it's if this was a female, this would be much buffier brown. These are very black, coming in black with quite a bit of red in the shoulder there. So they can be confusing, but these are both singing male red-winged blackbirds. So another great bird of this season is something called the black scoters. And black scoters are massing in these great blobs of inky sort of shapes on the ocean around the shores of Block Island. And if you're lucky, and this is going to be an experiment, you may be able to hear them. And what you're hearing is a little static, the ocean, and hopefully you can hear that high-pitched sort of whistling of, mostly these are black. It's one of the most evocative sounds of late winter. If I focus in, I can see now, this is a very long distance for my very little camera, but it gives you a definite sense of the numbers of birds that are out there and what they look like. They have these bright orange bills, and they're really quite amazing. But that is a sound and a scene that you hear only at late winter. The sound of the mostly black scoters. There's a good mix of other things in there, but so that's a late winter bird with our transition. Now we're back to things that are green in the winter, and common Greenbriar is everywhere on Block Island. This is an invasive vine species, and it's like a tangle. And if you question, it is green year round, and here's a close-up with some of its berries, and here's a real close-up of its thorns. And this is not a fun plant to deal with. As I say, it's invasive. It can be quite a tangle. It's very strong. It's hard to get through, and it's a hard invasive species to manage. But it's green. And another invasive species that sticks around all winter and holds on to its green leaves is the Japanese honeysuckle. These series of photos were taken on a kind of cold day. And when it's cold, they tend to curl their leaves a little bit, similar to what you see happening with rhododendrons. But it's winter and they're green. So the next micro season we come to is the 6th to the 10th, and that's the one we're just ending now. And this is when skunk cabbage emerges. This is probably our first, the beginning of our spring flower season. If you tune in next month when we do early spring flowers, I'll be able to show you the flowers of this plant. These are just the buds, and they're kind of a mottled green. They, I only know of one place on Block Island where these exist. They may be in other places, but what they like is really marshy, wet soil, something like these kind of habitats where you have a lot of moisture, not necessarily open water, but standing water. In the picture on the left, you can see it's a pond leading down to a marshy edge with some wonderful moss. And in the picture on the right, you can sort of make out the water behind the trunks. This is sort of standing water. But these are the habitats for most of the greens that we see this time of year and skunk cabbage. So the next micro season that we're coming to is coming right up, and it's warming water for winter flounder. Now, this is a baby winter flounder, and this photo is from Deandra Verbes, the Great Salt Pond scientist here with us at the Nature Conservancy. And Block Island is a really important spot for winter flounder, especially breeding. And this is the time of the year that the adults come in and will seek out the shallower waters and spawn and have their larvae dispersed in the warm waters. And then they use the swamplands, the warm like Andes Way and the shallow waters to for the youngs to grow and be protected from big fish, which can't get into the shallow waters, and have lots of nutrients to grow and grow. As I grew up on Block Island, winter flounder were much more prevalent, and people would start fishing for them from the bridges, so the Beach Avenue Bridge or the Trims Pond Bridge with long spears from on top of the bridge. Not as easy as it sounds, but they're great flat fish, as you can kind of tell from this image. And because they are flat fish, that if you're looking down on top of this on the sandy bottom, the camouflage is incredible. But they don't want to have one eye in the sand. So flounders have evolved so that both of their eyes are on one side, the top surface. This is the winter flounder. If I understand it correctly, the summer flounder, the eyes are on the other side. You have to flip it over, but I think Dee's on here, and maybe at the end she can confirm or deny that. Could be an old Block Island rumor I heard once. But boy, those are amazing eyes, aren't they? And there's two of them on one side of the head. So winter flounder are to be marveled at and celebrated as they come back into the warmer waters of the coast and spawn for another year. So we are in the we're about to enter the season of winter flounder. So I've adopted a fun practice of naming the moons on Block Island to Block Island centric things that are happening in nature. And in some cultures, they name the full moon, and in some cultures, they name the new moon. And of course, the new moon is the moon that you cannot see very well because it is completely shadowed by the earth. So the new moon is about to happen, and I've adopted the title the Winter Flounder New Moon because it's going to happen in the season of winter flounder. So we are in the other and it's so we're about to be in the new moon of the winter flounder. What happens around the new moons and the full moons is that we get extreme tide, and especially in winter when Earth is a little bit the moon is a little closer to Earth, it has a greater effect on the tides. And this is extreme low tide where we're looking into the back part of Harbor Pond just last week, actually. And this was more associated with the previous full moon of February, but that is an incredible low tide. If you're familiar with the island, you know that you rarely see these this spot all at the surface. You could walk across there. Of course, it's wonderful for clamming. There weren't any clammers out there that day, but there were some ducks. But it's pretty great to see how these tidal waters can change so much, but you get a sense of how shallow they really are, and thus warm up very nicely. So super low tide, and soon we'll be having another series of low tides around the upcoming new moon. So back into winter and what's green all year round. American holly is green all year round. And it's the time where I notice the holly the most is in the wintertime, because all the leaves are off of everything else. So you can see it in our landscape. And there's a lot more holly out here than you might think. And it's getting bigger. This is along the edge of a trail I was recently walking on. And this holly over here is really quite tall. It's this is the top of the main stem, main trunk. And it's probably about 7 or 8 feet tall. But it's being completely entangled with Greenbriar and Japanese honeysuckle. And so it's kind of distorting its growth shape. So I'm going to be hoping that we can identify some of these, especially a big one. This one is really on its way to becoming quite a large holly. It's well established. It's already got some height. I think if we could open up some of the entanglement of the vines, it might give this a chance to be a really beautiful sort of specimen tree, because it looks only like it's got a few vines, but of course when these are full of leaves, these vines, they're shading the holly out, and it's not getting everything it needs. But otherwise it's pretty healthy. So holly is a nice evergreen tree to be seeing on Block Island in the wintertime. Now, we are about the middle of the month is when we go into the season of chorusing ebbets. And not everybody knows that an ebbet is a very localized term for a spring peeper. And they're very small, these spring peepers, and soon, any day now, they're going to start chorusing. Once the weather gets a little warm, I wouldn't even be surprised if tonight in a few places we didn't hear the sound of chorusing ebbets. And it's a wonderful sound. The sound of spring peepers, many people think of as the first sort of sign of spring. And peepers are not to be confused with the green frog, which is the other. We have 3 frogs on Block Island now. The green frog will also start being active a little bit later, comes a little later than the spring peeper. The green frog is about twice the size of the spring peeper. So spring peeper can be a little golden color, but it can be mottled green, so more green. And at the end of the, chorusing ebbets season is the 20th. And this year, the vernal equinox, the spring equinox, is going to happen on the 20th. And one of the first signs, or another prevalent sign of spring, is the daffodils blooming on Block Island. And of course, many people are familiar with the daffodils up at Clay Head, around the Lapland property and throughout the Clay Head trails. but they're all over the island as well. And they are just starting to turn what looks like a very brown winter habitat with lots of patches of green daffodils. And some years they're actually a little behind, I think. Some years they're a little bit farther along than this. If we get a warm spell, they might go fast, but it's really hard to predict because they adjust very quickly to warming weather. So if it stays cool, they'll linger a little longer before they bloom. But if it warms up, they could be in full bloom by the end of the month. So spring is coming, and the emergence of the daffodil leaves is another first sign of spring, as is the arrival of osprey. And this was last year. We haven't seen that. I have not seen an osprey yet this year, but again, they're about to show up at any moment in this season. So nothing green about them, except that they will show up, and they're under their own power. So no petrol for them to get all those thousands of miles. They will be coming from as far away as South America, Central America, Caribbean islands, Bahamas. They kind of go out all over the not only the coastlands of Central and South America, but also inland along rivers and large lakes. So soon we'll be seeing osprey. And I would say that the blooming daffodils and the return of the ospreys are probably going to happen just about the same time this year, right around the vernal equinox. As we get on into the later part of the month, we are going to be into the season of the seal haul out peak. And I spoke recently quite a bit about seals, so I won't linger too long here, but they're at their peak season. About all that are going to come to the southern Rhode Island and Black Island for their daily haul outs have arrived, and soon they'll start leaving to go back to their pupping and breeding grounds north of here. So, but this is the peak, and not the greatest photo, but it certainly gives you a sense of the abundance. And there's a couple of species represented in this photo. So, spring haul out, seal haul out season will be coming soon. But it's not the only thing that shows spring in the coastline. A lot of people don't know or haven't paid attention to the fact that the algae, the seaweed that grows on our rocks along the shoreline, they green up in the spring. They've been sort of dormant and looking sort of dark gray and black and have died back. And about now, they start to green up. They are, of course, like most plants, they photosynthesize. And once the days get long enough, they get that chlorophyll going, and they start to green up and start covering the rocks. This is about this time. It's still not really sort of the vibrance of the green that you will see. So if you're around the island, just over the next few weeks, and this will start, it's starting now, but over the next few weeks, these will get greener and greener. So any place you could see the coastline from the road, like on Spring Street, look at the rocky shoreline and look today, and you'll notice how green it is or is not. And then look in 2 weeks, and you'll see a big difference of the greening of the seaweed along our shoreline. This is off of Cunimus on the west side of the island. And then this is off of Clayhead. And again, just starting to green up. This was just a few days ago. Not very thick in green yet. It will get thicker and more vibrant as the season goes on. But just as a reminder, it's still a little cold. So they will do a little better and grow a little faster and a little brighter when it gets a little warmer. And this is a particular favorite of mine. This is a little bit later in the season last year. Not too much. This is The previous picture was taken last week. This photo was taken a year ago, a week later than this week. But the textures, the patterns of that seaweed, of the algae, just taking hold wherever it can. Again, this is green algae, green seaweed algae, same thing, on a big giant hunk of pots and kettles out at Clayhead. So look for the greening of our shoreline. There are other things that are green crabs that don't look green, and green stones. And first to the crabs, they look sort of orange, but these are in fact green crabs. This is a photo that's taken a little bit earlier in the season and not this year. But it's kind of fun to see the variety. There's males and females in this photo. The male crabs have a very thin tail like this, and the females have a very thick, much wider tail, like, and that is this tail. It doesn't look like a tail, but when it's full of eggs, she's carrying this mass of orange eggs underneath this tail. It kind of hinges out to sort of hold that mass of eggs to her body. Excuse me. So green crabs, remember, sense of humor, and then green stones. And of course, Block Island, as many of us know, is a glacial deposit, and there are stones and rocks throughout the shoreline, throughout the whole island, that have come from other places. And there's a strain of this green stone, and I'm sorry, I don't have the right name for it in terms of whether or not it's a feldspar or nice, but it's green. And this strain is found throughout Greenland and Northern Europe and England. So any stones that you find that are really green like this, and this is dry, a lot of stones look green when they're wet, but not when they're dry, came with the glaciers from a very far distance away. So it's always fun to look for the green stones when you're on the beach. You find a lot of white ones and black ones and gray ones and pink ones, but the green ones are a little less frequent. So green crabs and green stones. And then we come to the last micro season of the month. Perhaps a time that was actually inspired most of this, a time of the greening of the moss and lichen. Moss and lichen, again, like many of these things, look very subdued, but once it gets warm and it gets some moisture in the air and on the ground, they perk up and they almost phosphoresce with green brightness. And it's amazing how different a stone wall will look with lichens and mosses on it after it's rained, starting in late March and April, depending on the year. Now, one thing I've learned is that moss are very difficult to identify. This might be a pincushion moss, and it might not. I found that they were extremely complicated. Of course, I have no experience with them, so I'm sort of just trying to learn on my own. So you look closer, and well, you see a little bit more texture, and that is just thousands of little tiny individual pieces of moss. So moss is an individual plant, and it will have leaves, but it doesn't have a root system per se. It just attaches to stone or substrate, just the ground. It gets a lot of its energy from photosynthesis, and it breaks down the substrate, creating soil. It doesn't live in the soil, it creates soil. And that's true of many of the mosses as well as lichens, and we'll see some of those. But mosses are very difficult to identify, to type. And here, another type is a little easier to tell, sphagnum moss, which you may be familiar with. The moss, it's primarily made of peat, And if you're walking around the island now, you'll notice that a lot of it is brown. But when you look into an area where it's wet and the sun is getting it, it is starting to green up, and it will get to be quite green and quite lush. It can be in a wetlands. The previous photo was really in water. This is just on a hummock on dry land, and it looks like it's wet because it's maybe a little icy. But the sphagnum moss, and there are many species of sphagnum moss. It's not just one. And here you can see the individual flowers. It hasn't, not flowers, individual leaves. Each one of these is a moss plant, and they're quite amazing. Some branch, some don't. Some have curled leaves, some have flat leaves, and there's a huge amount of knowledge to gain to understand mosses. And if any of you know any moss specialists who'd like some time on Block Island, send them my way. I'd love a tutorial and perhaps can work something out. Moving on. So moss, again, come in all kinds of, all different species and all kinds of forms. They will start to put up these stalks, which are at the top of the stalk will have a capsule full of spores, which is how mostly how they reproduce. But it's kind of fun. You walk along a pathway this week and you notice a little green, and you walk along that same pathway in 2 weeks, and suddenly it looks sort of fuzzy like this. And you realize the moss is doing something, and it's getting ready to reproduce. This is a different place, but the same idea. And if you were to, this isn't quite clear enough. I was focused on the fact that you could see the rain droplets, but actually you can see the very beginning, these little dark parts, the very beginning of the development of the capsule that contains the spores. So, and then if you look yet another day, you can, and you can see how small this is relative to my hand, and how little vegetation. There's sand in here, some dirt. This is very poor soil. I should be able to ID this based on its substrate, because it's just like terrible soil that it's on. It's all sand, and yet there's a green plant under there producing all these stalks with these wonderful little capped capsules. And these little caps will come off, and then the capsule will be sort of had its lid taken off, if you will, and then that little capsule will be full of spores that will disperse. So fun to look for these if you just appreciate their wonder, and don't try to name them unless you have a moss specialist with you, which will not be me, at least for a while. And then, of course, there are the lichens. Lichens are actually a symbiotic organism made up of fungi and green algae, green bacteria. Some of them have cyanobacteria, blue-green algae, and they come in all kinds of forms and all kinds of textures. And they're also very difficult to identify these over time. This is a group known as the green shield lichens. And you can kind of get the idea of why that would be, the way they form like a shield over the rock substrate, and they're green. In this particular one, these are the spore capsules. So this piece of lichen, and the texture is just amazing. It's just amazing. You can see it has depth as it is just on this piece of pink granite quartz, pink quartz, I think mostly. And these are these little spore pockets that at this time of year form when it's just whatever conditions are perfect for this particular lichen. They form, and then when they open up, the spores that are held within these little bowls, these little pockets, will be released to start another lichen somewhere else. But again, the texture, the shape, the beauty, you know, you just can't beat it, even if you can't name it. And of course, lichens come in many shades of green. And you might say the picture on the left that they're not green, but I'm calling those green yellow and green gray. But lots of different lichens, lots of different shades, and look for them over the next couple of weeks, especially after a rainy day or a foggy day. After the fog sort of lifts, it's been saturated the surfaces with moisture, and then the sun shines on them. It's as if they sprang into life, which probably they did. And a bushy beard lichen, another lichen. These grow in the upper parts of the trees, high enough in the tree that the deer can't get them, because the deer do like to eat them. Very filamentous, completely different form than the flat shield lichens, but pretty cool anyway. And this one, I didn't pick one that had any spore capsules on it, but they're out there, but look up. You can't find them on the ground. So at the end of so I named the new moon for Block Island, but I adopted the regular traditional indigenous name. There are several indigenous names for the full moons, and this seems like I listed the full sap moon, and that will happen on the 28th, right at the end of our last micro season of March. And it commemorates what's happening now in nature. The sap is beginning to run. And in northern New England, of course, they're going to be maple sugaring, probably have already started. This is sap, a little piece of sap running out of a pine tree. And that pine actually, you're more likely to see, well, you can see sap on any tree, but you're more likely to see sap coming out of a pine tree than one of our own maples. And I can remember they used to, when I was a kid, they had a big grove of pine trees up at the Black Island School. And we used to go out there and it would be dripping, especially this time of year, and a little later when it would with these like drips, these golden drips of sap, and they would turn white as they dried out. But we all thought that was Native American gum. So we, as kids, would go out there at recess and pull off the sap off of the pine tree and try to chew it like gum. It didn't really chew. It had a very interesting taste. Nobody seemed to be worried about us eating the tree. So, and we all survived. So again, I always say, don't try this at home, but for me, it was fine. But enjoy the full sap moon. And this photo, obviously we haven't had the full March moon yet, but this photo just happened to have been taken last year on March 10th. So I thought, well, this is the full moon shot to use. Of all the full moon shots that I have. So, full sap moon coming at the end of our last micro season. Now, there are lots of places to notice green of things that you don't think of as green. The common eider, so ocean duck, the male has this beautiful, subtle green cheek that it develops in breeding season. Quite a beautiful color, subtle, that you don't necessarily see. This is a really wonderful sort of image. You see a lot of its sort of subtle coloring, is a little bit of pink here that you normally would not notice, and sort of the amber a little bit on its white back. And of course, we're back to our humorous mallards and that green head of the mallard. And there's one more bird that we don't see often, but luckily I got to see this week, and that is a green-winged teal. And they have this beautiful green wing patch right here. Sun isn't quite hitting it right, but you can make out that it's green, and of course, right along its eye. This is a male green-winged teal. Here's a little bit closer of its face. Another beautiful bird. Again, it's in its breeding plumage, so it's really crisp. The subtle plumage of its chest and its sides and these feathers going down its back, just completely beautiful. Now, teal is a very small duck, a dabbling duck, one that eats vegetation in ponds. And I haven't noticed them all winter. I saw a few in Kunamis Swamp in November, but this week they showed up. Things are starting to move. They're moving northward for their breeding time as well. But green-winged teal, there were about 4 of them on Socken Pond, a broken wing. And I am often called about injured birds. So I got called on this. I arranged to have it sent off by boat to the wildlife rehab clinic in North Kingston. And I have not heard its disposition as of yet. That was just on Sunday. But I imagine they were going to have to euthanize that bird, but we gave it a chance. And not green at all is next to it, this hole in the Clayhead Bluffs. This was taken just a few days ago when I was down looking for green algae on the rocks, but I had to look up at this hole, and it's not a very good picture, but this funny shape right here is a hiding barn owl. And on Black Island, the barn owls nest in holes in the cliffs. This one has been used for several years that I know of, and it's being used again this year. So a little tiny, it's a small camera and I'm pretty far down, so to get any image at all, but I'm positive it's a barn owl. And a little bit better image was taken last year when there were 2 in the hole. Same hole. This year's a little bit, it's a little bit bigger, and this hole is right underneath the edge of the bluff. And I'm sure that one of these days it's going to collapse and not be a hole anymore. And that brings me to the end of my spring greening, the mysteries of March. And my inspiration again was the lichens. I just love the lichens. And in this particular image, you could see lichens, you can see some moss, you can see some green honeysuckle. So the mysteries of March and their greenness. So happy St. Patrick's Day. And I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Thanks, Kim. People can take themselves off mute, I hope.
Let's
Love
see.
it. Kim, I had a quick question. The Ebbets, how did that name come about for the
That's a really
spring?
question. I really don't know. And I know I've always heard it as Ebbets on Black Island. I have asked. I don't think it has anything to do with Ebbets Field in baseball land. I don't know that they're called Ebbets anywhere else.
Okay.
Took me the longest time. I used to ask when I was a kid, how do you spell it? 2 E's, 2 T's, 2 T's, 1 E. Does it have an I? No, but we've sort of settled on the EBBET, Ebbets, and I can't answer the question. And if anybody finds somebody who can, I'd love to hear it. But believe me, I've asked a lot of people.
Isn't that like Ebbets Hollow?
Yeah, Ebbets Hollow, but that's because Ebbets are really loud down there. It's a lot of swamp down at Ebbets Hollow. And I grew up in Ebbets Hollow, so which is right off of High Street near the Black Island School. So let's see, I'll stop sharing here and I can go back to, there we go.
I have a question about this. Do you see this?
Yes, I can see that. It looks like,
What do you think that is? It's kind of
I-
funny. It's like plastic. It feels like plastic.
right, it's probably cartilage, right? And it's probably from, it's hard to, could you turn it the other way just for a second? The height of it. Let's see. So it looks like it has a keel. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's probably dogfish or shark or sand shark. One of the cartilaginous fishes like that. A skate.
That's interesting because it was at least 200 yards off of West Beach.
Yeah.
Close to the middle pond. But I had a quick question for you, Kim. First, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed all your videos.
Thank you.
But my question is, in the beautiful piece that you wrote in the Block Island Times, you talked about March moving from orange to yellow. And I'm wondering, particularly out here on the neck here, I'm seeing it a little bit more golden, but what's making it change? And because I see it subtly happening from orange to yellow.
So I think when I wrote about that, it had to do with the quality of the light, right?
Yeah.
And that has to do with the angle of the sun and how it's changing. Yeah. So, and you know, I always, no,
it's not any change in
right. So when I talk about that, I'm usually talking about the quality of the light in the air. And I can always notice, I'm always happy in late August, early September when I go, oh, the light is changing from a yellow to a gold. And now I feel that it's changing from the gold to the yellow. And it maybe I'm just crazy, but that's what my eye sees.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question.
Sure. I'm wondering where the ospreys are on Block Island.
Right now?
well, in summer or whenever they're here.
Yeah, so osprey, about 15 years ago now, osprey started nesting for the first time on an osprey platform at the Block Island Power Company.
Oh.
So there's been a continuous nest there since then. And our hope, and it seems to be bearing out, that with each successive generation, that there's a chance of those young coming back, because they tend to come back to roughly the same area.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's been a nesting pair at the south end of Sock'em Pond for a couple of years. Last year there was a pair in the way south end of Rodman's Hollow towards the bluff, in an old snag, an old pine snag. And I think there's one in Clay Head, although I've never found the nest. I've certainly seen the activity of the osprey carrying fish, not in the direction of the nest that I know of. Mm-hmm. So we have, the power company has been really terrific in supporting putting up poles for osprey and fixing poles. I have a pole at the Ocean View Pavilion in town. We've never had an osprey there. I think there's a few reasons for that, and it's not because it's too close to ballards. But they did put up four additional poles this winter. So we'll see if any of them get a pair. At least one of the poles was put up. One of the poles was put up off of Kunamis Road in a place where the osprey have been making or attempting to make. It usually takes them a couple of years before they really get the hang of it. But they've been attempting to make a nest at the top of a utility pole, which is not good. It's not good for the power and the outages that it can cause, and it's not good for the osprey. So the power company is sort of, it's it's a very good community thing they do, but it's also a way of helping them not cause a big problem by building a nest on the top of a pole where when the twig falls off, shorts out the power and kicks out the power. So I think, the osprey nesting population is definitely building, and I can't wait to see this year if, as I say, I only know of those 3 that 3.5, the one near Kunamis that didn't really take yet, 3 that have actually set up nests.
Thanks.
So, yeah. And if they're successful, I'm sure I'll be writing about it in the summer. So
Good.
Kim, you also get the opportunity to band the chicks at the power company too. Do you
right.
ever see? Is there any record after
So,
you
yeah.
ban them? Have they been seen anywhere else or?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the power company is really great, and it was the previous members of the power company that started this, but they just love the osprey. It's their osprey, and they have a bucket truck, and they go up and bring down the chicks one at a time, and I band them and they put them back. It's quite exciting, and it's something I get to do often with the 4th grade who were studying birds at that time. So it's really a terrific experience. But in 2006, 2006, one of my birds that I had banded, not really mine, but that I had banded, showed up in Jamestown, Rhode Island. And there's a man named Bob Beauregard, who's really an authority on osprey and done a lot of work with osprey and where they go and how they migrate. And he puts on trackers when he's studying them. He was studying an osprey platform in Jamestown, and he was trying to catch the female on the nest, and it's quite elaborate how they do that, but he didn't get the female the first time out. He got the male, and the male was my banded bird from Block Island. And he had an extra radio tag, so he put it on that bird, and it was great because he has a website, and you could watch all summer where that bird was. And it was like looking at a single spot in Jamestown and seeing thousands of spokes going out like wheel spokes on its fishing forays all summer long, and mostly in the Jamestown fairly close area until late August, at which point it migrated and you could see it making its way down the coast. And it was really great. And then in late October, I think it was, it stopped recording right in the middle of the Cozumel Sea, right exactly at the same time of a hurricane in the middle of the Cozumel Sea. So I think what happened was the wind blew the transmitter off of the bird, and so the transmitter is kerfunked, but the bird is still somewhere.
That's right. The bird has lived on.
Yeah. But that was really fascinating. I love that, and but that's the only one I know of so far. But hopefully I'll get a chance to band some of the other osprey on other nests around the island, and it would be really interesting to see, or not band, but just be able to observe the adults close enough to see if they're banded.
Yeah.
I won't be able to see the band number, I'm pretty sure, but if it is banded, it's probably a high likelihood that it's one of the young from here. So
that's great.
So stay tuned.
Thanks.
Kim,
Yeah.
is that witch hazel behind you? I noticed you didn't mention witch hazel, and it's all blooming here, but I know Connecticut is the special spot for witch hazel.
It is witch hazel. It is witch
okay.
hazel. And I love that plant, and I planted that myself. It's not wild.
Oh, okay.
I don't think we have any wild ones, but there are several in yards around the island that I've noticed over the years.
Yeah, and they're blooming right now.
They're blooming right now. And I was saying earlier that they force very nicely. So I usually start forcing my first bit of witch hazel at the end of January.
Oh,
And I
love
usually
that.
get 3 times before they bloom in the wild, in nature.
Wow.
And so on my table is the wilting number 3 of the forest witch hazel. And I'm always a little sad. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to wait till next year to see it again. And
But
if
then
you've
start
ever,
forsythia, because you force some forsythia, you'll still have yellow.
yeah, I've got some in my kitchen.
Oh, good, okay.
They're not yellow yet, but they will be in a day or two.
Mhm, mhm.
And if you're familiar with witch hazel, they have the most beautiful light fragrance. So it's definitely worth it to get a little sprig and force it in the house.
I will. Well, it's already blooming. I don't have.
I don't know what it looks like. Do you?
I didn't
I've
get
seen
that.
a whole bunch of it in college at the Arboretum.
Yeah.
Oh,
All right, Kim. Anyone else have any other questions or comments or?
Very
You want to ask about the pheasant?
About the what?
About the pheasant?
pheasant?
Oh, the
About some-
pheasant?
Yeah, about
Kim,
So-
why don't you mention it because it is on,
Sure. I will. I'll mention the pheasant. So people are going to think I'm like the woman of dead birds here. But I'm really not. I'm just the person who gets called when there are bird issues. So this past week, a neighbor friend of Block Island called me and said that a pheasant had hit their window while they were there. So they experienced the thud and the demise of the bird. So I went and got it. It was a hen pheasant, a female, and it's absolutely beautiful. Unfortunately, it had a broken neck. And so, I'm not one to let things go to waste. So Charlotte and I made a little video about the pheasant and got some really up close pictures of the feathering, which is just gorgeous, and talked about the life history of the pheasant. And it's on YouTube. Is that right, Charlotte? YouTube channel?
It's on, what I'll try to do is I'll try to get it on where we keep the Zooms as well, the Zoom recordings, but our media person put it on our YouTube channel. And also if you follow the Rhode Island Nature Conservancy, it's on our Facebook page and Instagram, but I don't know if I can direct you to all those, but it's neat to see. It was so beautiful to see it up close, very sad, but very beautiful.
Right, and just I say in the piece that I'm talking about the bird, and I say that we're going to return it to nature and bury it. But in fact, I'm not going to actually bury it. I'm going to keep it in the freezer until May or June when it's warmer and when it's time for the burying beetles to start their mating and nesting, because pheasant are very important to the American burying beetle on Block Island. There's a prime food source for burying and then laying their eggs so that the larvae will have the food of the carcass. So I say that I'm going to bury it because I was trying to be too simple-minded, but it's really this complex way of keeping it and then returning it to nature at the right time for the American burying beetles.
Wow.
So it's all part of the web of life, and it is sad that it died and there's not going to
There's
raise
no
chicks,
telephone.
but it's going to support the American burying beetles.
Might be.